Bethesda are basically known for two series of games. The Elder Scrolls, which is completely their own series, and Fallout, which was originally another studio's creation which they later took on. Despite each series being made by the same company, it's easy to distinguish the massive differences between the two, and I can guarantee that every individual who has played both series of games is going to have a favourite. My favourite out of the two is the Elder Scrolls, and I'm going to be explaining the reasons why in this video. Please take into account that I don't hate Fallout at all, I merely prefer the Elder Scrolls. Also, this video is going to focus on the newest additions to each series, so namely Skyrim and Fallout 4. So think of this video as more of a comparison between these two games. It's not really comparing the series, I'm comparing the latest additions to each series. The first main point I'm going to talk about is the world, and this is arguably the most important thing when it comes to an open world RPG game. Fundamentally, I think the world of Fallout 4 feels less fulfilling and immersive than one of Skyrim, and I'd argue that by its very nature, the world isn't going to be the strong point of Fallout 4. It's set in a post-apocalyptic world. Of course, it's going to be more bland than that of Skyrim, which is set in a fantasy world with diverse terrain. But that doesn't excuse the fact that the Skyrim world just feels more full, and I fundamentally think this stems from the fact that the world of Skyrim is much more varied. It's more compelling, basically. The world of Fallout 4 is just a dead world. There's dead grass, dead trees, derelict houses, derelict supermarkets, things like that. It all feels quite samey. Now compare that to Skyrim, which has defining features like the Throat of the World, the College of Winterhold, the forests of Falkreath and the mountains near Dawnstar. It's just so varied and full, and I think this fundamentally comes from the fact that yes, Fallout 4 is obviously in a post-apocalyptic world, but the game design and just how bland the world of Fallout 4 is compared to Skyrim doesn't help this at all. Take the example of Good Neighbor or Diamond City compared to somewhere like Whiterun. It just feels a lot more limiting and less open and less compelling. Again, like the world, the towns of Fallout feel dead. If you think about somewhere, as I said, Good Neighbor, it simply cannot compare to the medieval looking thriving settlement of Whiterun. It's just so much more exciting to enter the thriving city of Whiterun compared to the dying and small little town of Good Neighbor. Ultimately, because of the way that Fallout is and that it's dead and dying and everything's derelict, I just feel like I can't lose myself as much in the game, and that's just a very general feeling that I think most people get when they do play it. In link with the world of both games, I think that exploration in Skyrim is much better than it is in Fallout. I've never really felt compelled to explore in Fallout. Usually I merely go from place to place in line with the main quest, and mostly I encounter dead trees, supermarkets, houses. A lot of the houses you can't even enter. By comparison, in Skyrim there's the Dwemer ruins, the mushroom towers on Solstheim, caves, and various minor settlements which are actually sort of interesting compared to the settlements of Fallout, which don't have any shops or anything. A small point to note is that on the whole, I think the settlement construction element of Fallout is pretty innovative and it's cool. I mean, I myself didn't delve into it too much, but I could appreciate that it's something that people enjoy. I think this degrades from the settlements overall that you can find, because it's up to you to build them up. Whereas in Skyrim, you come across a settlement, it's already built up, and you have to explore it, and it just feels like it's got so much more tenacity than it does in Fallout. For example, compare Riverwood to any minor settlement you encounter in the world of Fallout 4. I can guarantee that it's going to be 10 times better, and it's actually got more than one quest in it. Again, arguably, it could be said that this is due to Fallout 4's world. Innately, it's set in a post-apocalyptic world. Of course, there's going to be less people, less settlements, that sort of thing. But I don't think that nullifies the point that Fallout 4 just feels a lot more bland in terms of the world and exploration than Skyrim. The atmosphere also derives from the world, but ultimately the atmosphere comes from a conglomerate of other factors like the music or whatever. But in Skyrim, I feel like the atmosphere is much more diverse, whereas in Fallout it pretty much stays the same whatever situation you're in. So in Skyrim there's sort of this adventurous atmosphere, but there are dark undertones. For example, throughout when you're doing the Civil War quests, there's the implicit Thalmor threat throughout the game. So I'd argue that the atmosphere on the whole just feels a lot more complex and dark and adventurous, and it doesn't necessarily have to mean that it's all these three things at the same time. By comparison, as I said, I think Fallout has the same tone throughout the game compared to Skyrim, which sort of switches between those tones. I'll give an example. So you could be travelling to Falkreath for the first time in your playthrough, and it's in the evening and it's pouring down with rain. The guard then approaches, and the initiation of the Barber's quest has this sort of sinister, mysterious undertone. There's got to be something beneath this quest. You can't simply be looking for a dog. Equally, you could be travelling north from Whiterun on a sunny morning and face a comical episode with Cicero and the wagon wheel. That's just an example of how dynamic the Skyrim atmosphere can be compared to Fallout. I feel like Fallout has this sort of comedic atmosphere throughout the entire thing. Can make sarcastic comments with almost any other character, which is pretty funny, I have to admit, but it just doesn't change. It's sort of this comedic undertone undermines the sort of tenacity and immersion in the post-apocalyptic world. But again, this could just merely be my perception. I just feel like the atmosphere of Skyrim's a lot more dynamic and fulfilling than the one of Fallout, and because it's so general, I don't think you can really give that many specific examples. And of course, it's intensely personal as well. In terms of the quests, I think that Skyrim and Fallout are pretty similar, apart from the fact that I dislike how many generated quests Fallout has. I mean, you've just got to mention Preston Garvey, and that's basically my point proven. By comparison, Skyrim has very few quests like that, although there are definitely some. But on the whole, in terms of the quests in general that aren't automatically generated, I think both games have main quests and just side quests with a lot of depth. I think that's something Bethesda does very well, and that's clearly present in both games. But again, I'd argue that the Skyrim ones are slightly better purely because I think there are more deep quests than there are in Fallout 4. But equally in Fallout, there are more funny quests that I actually just enjoyed doing just because they were so funny. For example, the USS Constitution quest, where you see the ship crashing into the tower. I have to say, that's one of the most entertaining things I think I've ever seen. It was just so stupid, but at the same time, I enjoyed doing it so much. But whilst that's a major strong point, I just don't think the quests in Fallout 4 in general, in terms of the Brotherhood of Steel and the Institution, can compare with the Daedric quests, the Civil War, the Dark Brotherhood, the Thieves Guild and the Companions in Skyrim. There are just so many fulfilling quest lines in Skyrim that have so many twists and turns, and I just don't get the same feeling in Fallout 4. Honestly, I can't remember most of the Fallout 4 side quests that I've done. I can remember distinctly the USS Constitution and the one about the dilemma involving Lorenzo, but I can't remember many more other than that, and this either means I have dementia or that they're just not that memorable. But as I said, in general, both games do have quite thought-provoking quests, and this is something that I think both games are very good at. For example, the Far Harbor DLC and the Skyrim Civil War are both very thought-provoking, although I'd argue that the Far Harbor quest with Acadia is actually superior in terms of how many endings there are. I think that's something that Fallout does very well, but on the whole, because of the fact that Skyrim has more quests that have a lot of depth in them, I think it's superior in that sense. Also, I think the quests in Skyrim and just how fulfilling they are is complemented by the fact that I actually wanted to explore. As I mentioned before, in Fallout 4 I was just sort of following the main quest, and I did a few side quests on the way, but a lot of the time I didn't go out and actively explore, or if I did, for example towards a late game, I sort of had to force myself to do it, to go out and explore, and I had to go on the wiki and look at the quests and things like that, so I made sure I experienced as much of the game as I could. I've already mentioned the guild quests, but I'd just like to make the point that in Fallout 4, a lot of the missions for the equivalents of the guilds, I know they're not really guilds, but for the Minutemen and the Brotherhood of Steel, a lot of the quests are auto-generated, so help this settlement and things like that, whereas in Skyrim and the Thieves Guild and the Dark Brotherhood, they are all actual unique quests, or the vast majority of them are anyway, and they're all integral to the storyline, so I feel like like the guilds and the factions you can join are just a lot more fulfilling. A small point I'm going to talk about is the UI in both games. Something I really like in Fallout is how it's almost more immersive in terms of you've got the map and your quests and your inventory on your Pip-Boy. I think if there was a way that they could integrate that into the next Elder Scrolls game, I think that'd be pretty sick, but I'm not too sure how they do that, or indeed if they even could do that. But I have to argue that the HUD in Skyrim is superior, so what you actually see on the screen, like your health bar and your stamina and stuff like that, I think that's better than it is in Fallout, because the Fallout one just didn't fit. As I mentioned earlier with the comedy, it sort of betrays the post-apocalyptic world and how dark it's supposed to be when you've got this bright yellow or bright green sort of health bar. It feels a bit weird, and I'm not sure why they did that. Maybe it's just because I'm not used to it, but I didn't particularly like that at all. I think the followers in Fallout 4 are massively superior to the ones in Skyrim, purely because of the diversity of the character comments, means that it's more enjoyable to travel with them. They're a lot more in-depth than the ones in Skyrim. When I was travelling with various companions, I found myself eagerly waiting what a character would say as we entered a new location or did a certain action, for example. And this is obvious from the fact that recently I've got addicted to the countless companion reaction videos on YouTube. An element of this was present in Skyrim. You'd get the odd comment, but just not to the same extent. I'd argue that both games have strong lead characters in the main quests and also the side quests as well. Examples being Maxon, Jarl Ulfric, Dance, Paarthurnax, Dima. I don't think there's much difference between each game in terms of the characters and their strength. I think they're both pretty good, but I think the better quests in Skyrim complement the characters more. For example, with the Civil War, you get a real feel for the characters of Tullius and Ulfric and what they stand for. The immersive quests made their characters more compelling, I think. To be honest, I never felt immersed in Maxon's ideology, or that of the Institute either, or even that of the Minutemen. I became convinced of Tullius's point of view though in Skyrim. I think that the game just sort of breeds you to sort of become immersed and believe and take part in the ideologies of the quests in which you're participating. I think it's kind of like the differences between the Hobbit movies and the Lord of the Rings movies. I felt massively more attached to the characters in Lord of the Rings than I did in the Hobbit, and I think this comparison rings true between Skyrim and Fallout as well, at least for me. A slightly weird point that I'm going to make is that of the soundtrack. Bethesda games usually have an amazing soundtrack, but in terms of the soundtrack, I don't think there's a competition. The Skyrim soundtrack far outstrips the Fallout one. The atmospheric music is just amazing. There's a reason why so many people, myself included, listen to the Skyrim soundtrack even today for things like studying and things like that. The music just transports me to another world. And yes, the Fallout soundtrack's okay, but personally I found it quite mediocre. The theme sounds cool and that's about it. I do fervently believe that a great soundtrack can make a great game, and Skyrim has one of the best soundtracks I've ever heard. In fact, the last 3 Elder Scrolls games have had beautiful soundtracks. I mean, just think about The Witcher 3. Imagine if The Witcher 3 had a god-awful or even mediocre soundtrack. It just wouldn't be the same game. It wouldn't be as nostalgic or as enjoyable. I think that's the same for Fallout 4. It itself is a good game, but the soundtrack lets it down a bit. In conclusion, I think Fallout 4 is a good game, but that's it. In relation to the Elder Scrolls series, it feels like it's gone 1 step forward, 2 steps back. The followers are cool, the quests are generally good, and the characters are well developed, but compared to Skyrim, it lacks any real tenacity. The world is less fulfilling, the music is mediocre, and the atmosphere feels stale along with the world. But I have to stress that this is all in my opinion, and that's the crux of this video. It is my opinion. No doubt there are going to be hundreds, perhaps even thousands if I'm lucky, of people watching this video who think that Fallout 4 is the best, most immersive and interesting game that they've ever played, and they are totally entitled to that view. But personally, I tend to value RPGs and my ability to get lost in them. In Skyrim, I can do that almost totally, but in Fallout I find it hard. There's always this nagging sensation that it's just a game. I never really get that in Skyrim. Thanks for watching this video. If you want to see more Elder Scrolls content, then feel free to check out my channel. Anyway, thanks again, and I'll see you in the next one.